No is going to say that Islam doesn't teach that? No. No, that's not what Muhammad said. He said, you wait 3 months for those prepubescent girls that you've had sex with. So think about this. He says, I haven't done the slightest bit of research. And what do we have? We have the Quran giving a very clear verse. If it's not clear enough for you, we can go to the greatest Muslim commentators of all time, including one of Muhammad's companions. And they all say this refers to young girls who have not reached the age of puberty. How do you divorce them after having sex with them? What's the process? And the Quran declares all of this. So Yahya says, David hasn't done the slightest bit of research. Well, if he said in his introduction, he said he's never come across this teaching, well, then he hasn't read the Quran. He hasn't read Surah 65. He hasn't read Tafsir of Ibn Kathir, or Tafsir of Jalalain, or Tafsir of Ibn Abbas. He hasn't read the greatest commentaries or the Quran. If he hasn't, what are you doing defending Islam? What are you doing telling everyone they're wrong and they don't know what they're talking about if you haven't studied these issues? Now, if this isn't enough, we can look, of course, at a couple of hadith passages. I'll just quote you the relevant portions. If you want the full context, no problem. But let's just run through Islam's most trusted collections of ahadith. That would be Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abu Dawud. Those are the 3 most trusted collections on Muhammad's teaching. Remember, according to Surah 33:21, Muhammad is the ultimate example for mankind. You look at Muhammad, that's the example that you should follow. Muhammad had sex with Aisha. How old was she? Well, let's read. Sahih al-Bukhari 3895. Aisha said, and he consummated the marriage when she was 9 years old. Muhammad consummated marriage with Aisha when she was 9 years old. Sahih al-Bukhari 5133. And he consummated his marriage when she was 9 years old. Sahih Muslim 3309. And I was admitted to his house at the age of 9. This is Aisha speaking, saying that when she was finally taken to Muhammad's house, she was 9 years old. Sahih Muslim 3311. And she was taken to his house as a bride when she was 9, and her dolls were with her. Notice that passage. And her dolls were with her. That's very important. Sunan Abu Dawud 2116. Aisha said, he had intercourse with me when I was 9 years old. Think about these passages. Aisha was 9 years old when Muhammad, the ultimate greatest moral example and the mercy to mankind, had sex with her. Since, according to the Quran, Muhammad is the standard, the moral standard, Muslims ever since have said, well, you can have sex with 9-year-old girls, no problem. And again, thousands of girls are suffering from this every year because of Muhammad's teachings,
And that's exactly their justification in the news today, is that this is what the Prophet did, and therefore, not only is this allowed, but it is desirable. It is even desirable for us to marry girls 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because after all, we're obeying the Quran to follow the perfect example, Muhammad.
Yes, and we talked on a previous show about this book, I Am Nujood, Age 10 and Divorced, about a young bride in Yemen who was married off at the age of 9. She was raped and beaten repeatedly by her husband. Note, in accordance with the teachings of Islam, beating and having sex with young girls, perfectly in line with Islam. She actually successfully fought for a divorce, and now the people defending her are getting death threats for going against Muhammad's teachings. But let me just read for you one short passage based on what Pastor Joseph just said. This passage, she's telling the story of what happened when her father was marrying her off, and her sister tried to object. Her sister said, look, she's too young. She's only 9 years old. Watch what happened. That very evening, I overheard a conversation between Mona and our father. Mona was her sister. Nujood is way too young to get married, Mona insisted. Too young? Replied her father. When the Prophet Muhammad wed Aisha, she was only 9 years old. So think about this. That little girl is too young to be having sex. This would be obvious to any civilized person in the world. What was the response? You can't say that's wrong because Muhammad did it. And this is the justification that's used by Muslims in the Muslim world. Now, we know that Aisha was 9 years old when Muhammad first had sex with her. What does this mean? Had she reached puberty yet? Well, no, because think about that phrase, and her dolls were with her. And her dolls were with her. In English translations of Sahih al-Bukhari, they give us the commentary on what that means. And it's actually in the text. Let me read to you Sahih al-Bukhari, number 6130. Narrated Aisha, I used to play with dolls in the presence of the Prophet. The playing with dolls and similar images is forbidden, but it was allowed for Aisha at that time as she was a little girl, not yet reached the age of puberty. Follow the reasoning here. Islam forbids playing with dolls. Aisha said that when she was taken to Muhammad's house for him to have sex with her, she was still playing with dolls. And she continued playing with dolls after Muhammad had sex with her. Wait a minute. If it's forbidden, why was Aisha allowed to continue playing with dolls? We know the answer. If you hadn't reached puberty yet, if you're a girl and hadn't reached puberty yet, they'd let you continue playing with dolls. So if Aisha, the mother of the faithful, was still playing with dolls while Muhammad was having sex with her, what does this mean? It means she had not reached the age of puberty when Muhammad was having sex with her. We know this is the case. We know, think about this. The Quran very clearly states divorce proceedings for girls that you have had sex with even though they hadn't reached the age of puberty. Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl, and we know since she was still playing with dolls, and this is forbidden for girls who have reached the age of puberty, Aisha had not yet reached the age of puberty. So Muhammad, the ultimate moral example, is having sex with a prepubescent girl, and the Quran, in response to a guy who's raising his hand saying, what about girls who haven't reached the age of puberty? What do we do then? And the Quran allows sex with these prepubescent girls. The Quran allows it. Muhammad set the example by doing it himself. How, in the name of common sense, can someone like Yahya Snow say, I've never run across this? All he can mean by that is he's never studied anything. And by the way, I would challenge him, since he's got this lack of references syndrome, give us clear statements from these four schools. The four schools base their interpretations on the Quran and the Hadith. The Quran and the Hadith are very clear. I know what he's referring to. Yeah. You do have passages in the teachings of the four schools that say things like, don't have sex with a girl before she's ready. And he says, aha, this must refer to puberty. That's not what it means. It means that if a girl is so small that you can't possibly enter her in sexual intercourse, then you engage in what was called thighing. Muhammad would engage in a practice called thighing when Aisha was 6 years old. Before he could actually have sex with her, she was too small before then. Before he could actually have sex with her, Muhammad, the greatest moral example, the example that you Muslims follow, would put his penis between her thighs and ejaculate on her. This is Muhammad. This is the greatest moral example of all mankind. So
because people are going to be upset. Where does this come from? Is this just your opinion? Does some Christian guy tell you this? Or where do you find this information?
You have this in fatwas, and if anyone wants to challenge us on this, because I really don't like to talk about the thighing issue.
Sure, but I mean, people are going to say, "Oh, you're making that up, you terrible Christian who hate Muslims. You're making that up." Come on, that's not what really Muhammad did.
I can pull something up. I'll pull up some passages.
Well, be ready, because they're going to touch you. They're going to challenge you on this.
Okay, call us in, and in the meantime, I'll pull up the passages. I don't want to read them, but if you're really dying to hear them, to hear about the thighing, and we even have fatwas from Muslims in the world today who ask about it. Some of the fatwas say this only applied to Muhammad. It applied to him, but not to the rest of you.
David, we have some callers. Shall we go ahead and take some, or do you want to go ahead and finish your argument?
Let me just wrap up. So think about what I jotted down what Yahya Snow was saying as he went along. He says he never came across a teaching in Islam. It's clearly in the Quran and the commentaries and the Hadith. He says he went to the four schools, didn't give us any references, and I know the sort of passages he's talking about. So Yahya, please send me clear references saying Islam specifically condemns sex with girls who have not reached the age of puberty. If you can show me that, well, I'll show you that Muhammad must have been a false prophet because he rejected that teaching. He said, notice he kept saying, here are some people, and they knew the Quran, they know Islam better than David would. Well, I hate to break this to you, my young friend, but Ibn Kathir, the two Jalals, Ibn Abbas, Al-Bukhari, the Quran certainly know Islam better than you, and they all agree with me on this issue. He says, I didn't do my research. Well, I gave you references. Notice I do not suffer from the lack of references syndrome. He referred to me as his brother. This should be, notice he referred to me as our brother.
Yeah.
This is a clear clue that this is a westernized liberal Muslim doing everything he can to reinterpret Islam.
Yeah.
If you knew what if you know what the Quran teaches, you would not call me brother. Surah 98:6 declares that